Therapy Notes, the highest rated EHR software for mental health professionals, is better than ever before. With free, live customer support available 24/7, they provide all the tools you need to succeed, whether you're a solo clinician or part of a group practice. Try it for free for 2 months with promo code MODERN today.
You learned a lot in grad school, but not how to run a profitable practice. Green Oak Accounting's Money for Therapists practice startup course bridges that gap. Get your practice's finances in order from the start. Visit greenoakaccounting.com/startup to learn more.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhelm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our practice, how we hold ourselves as therapists, and some of the things that don't necessarily have exact prescriptions on what we're supposed to be doing in our line of work. And this episode is inspired by an email that we received from one of our listeners. This is from Aaron. Hi, Katie and Curt. I was wondering if you could do an episode on therapist dishonesty. Examples: when it is okay and when is it not? Should you correct yourself at a later time? Parentheses, if the truth would have been harmful at the time. How to handle if the client finds out things and brings it up. How to handle it if it was a misunderstanding. When it could be a good clinical decision and when it might look like the right decision, but it turns out to backfire, and why. And what could have been done instead. How often is it that clients can tell but just don't bring it up, and how they might behave? Example, withdraw or terminate, but give some other reason. Examples of common and uncommon situations. Katie, do you ever lie to clients?
Yes, I probably do. Most of the time, like little tiny untruths, mistruths, that's not the right word, but tiny little things, deflections, kind of avoiding talking about things. But I don't think I have done big lies with clients, but I certainly have done some smaller lies that we'll talk about in this episode. But how about you? Do you lie to your clients?
I don't want to sound overconfident or misrepresent myself in any way here, but yeah. And I think that we're going to get through a lot in this episode out of, like, there are a bunch of different kinds of lies. And as Aaron asks in the question that was sent to us by email, there's times where it makes sense. There's times where it doesn't. There's times where it backfires. There's no blanket rules when it comes to clients, because what might work with one client might not work with another one. And we're going to dive into all of that.
Yes, we are. We are definitely indeed. So we're going to be basing this in an article from the Journal of Ethics and Mental Health. The article is Lies, Deception, and Denial in the Counseling Profession, an Inconvenient Truth. This is by Isaac L. Williams is the author on this, just one author. And it was published, I think, in 2018. This article is very helpful. I think it's a good read. It's like 29 pages, so it's a little bit of a long read, but some of it has some really great examples in there, and I think it can be very helpful. So I'll definitely put this in the show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. But the reason I like this article for this conversation is that it talks through different types of lies and puts them on kind of a scale and gives examples. And so I think the way that we want to structure this is to start with a little bit about what lying can look like in therapy, and then talk through and kind of share our opinions on some examples of when we might lie, when we might choose not to lie, and, pros and cons of both. And as well as, some of what Aaron has asked for. There was a lot in that email, so I don't know that we're going to cover all of those things, but try to get to a place of some takeaways around the nuance of deception and what you might want to do instead, or how you might fix things when they backfire. And so we've also talked about some of this stuff before, so there's going to be a lot of relevant episodes that are in the show notes as well. To get started, the first type of lie, the biggest the boldest kind of lie are Whoppers. The author's using, I think, kind of fun words to describe these lies. But Whoppers are bold-faced lies. The types of lies that are discussed in here are, I think, akin to fraud. Falsely certifying treatment, extending the duration of treatment beyond what you believe is beneficial to continue to receive payment, lying about what happened, upcharging or overutilization, billing for services not rendered, those types of things. Like, these are clearly lies, I think loosely lies, but I would call it fraud, that are never okay.
These ones, seemingly at face value, are illegal and unethical.
Yes. So moving on to the next type of lie, fibs. Unlike Whoppers, fibs are falsehoods that are used for the sake of the counseling relationship or therapeutic treatment process. So these ones seem to have potentially clinical utility or utility within the relationship. So I think there's probably going to be a little bit more discussion here around the nuance that you were talking about and some of the context that we were talking about before we hit record. So, Curt, do you fib to clients?
Absolutely, yes. And I will say that more often than not, the fibs that come up are true. They're stories that are based in truth, but for the convenience of the client, in order to keep the focus on where it's beneficial to the client, the details get changed. So
Okay.
it might be something that's a personal experience of mine, but it would be completely inappropriate to say, I went through this thing.
Okay. So give me an example.
So it might be something where, if a client is talking about, have you ever experienced suicidal ideation? Depending on the nature of the client or what might come up, what I'll say is, I've worked with a lot of people who have been in this very specific part of suicidal ideation, which is just don't want to be here. Like, I'm envisioning walking through, life, and it's just looking at a bus coming down the street and just picturing myself like, what if I stepped in front of the bus?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the example that I'm using here, but if that's my story, it's not appropriate to tell clients like, oh yeah, I've totally had these thoughts before of like,
Sure.
what if I stepped in front of the bus?
Mhm.
So those are the kinds of fibs where it's like, oh yeah, I had a client that thought that once. That's kind of just shifting it off of the focus of, let's not make this about me. Let's put this into a little bit of a validation, hope, and here's what that person did to get through this.
Yeah. Okay. The example in here is actually the opposite, which is untruthfully telling the client you have experienced the same situation or felt the same way in order to relate to the client. And so I think fibs are actually a little bit more active. But the one I want to talk about in this section is denying boredom or drowsiness in session, but giving credit to an innocuous or therapeutic sounding reason.
Interesting.
I actually had a colleague at one point who was determined that if they started yawning, it was a sign that there was some undisclosed grief responses that the client wasn't addressing. And so if that went into the session, the conversation became about, what grief are you not talking about?
So this therapist had grief dar.
I guess so. It was a special kind of grief dar. Yeah.
I remember being early in my career and having that desire to validate clients' experiences through empathy. And I think this is a very natural, when you're first working with a lot of clients, to kind of deal with your own sort of inadequacies, to be like, oh yeah, I totally know what that feeling is, and talk. And a lot of us end up maturing through that kind of a process to be able to explore some of that empathy or to validate clients' experiences. Sometimes that does put therapists into a position where they are making up stuff just to hide their own inadequacies, as you're talking about here, to be, oh yeah, I totally know that. And this is one of those situations where I think, to Aaron's questions in the letter to us, or the email to us, is this is where it can backfire, where clients can be like, oh, tell me more. And then if you don't really have, a story that goes along with that, that can be something that creates a therapeutic rupture with your clients. And then
Sure.
you're going into damage control. And I think that that's really one of the big dangers here. I've learned for a lot of my career where those situations that come up where I get asked, do you have any experience with this? I've largely come to a place of honesty, which is I don't have my own personal lived experience with this particular thing. And if it does become something that ends up becoming a barrier in our therapeutic process, we'll address that for what it needs to be. In the meantime, let's talk about the concerns with it. And so there's really being able to own kind of your own limitations. That's the
Yeah.
antidote to this.
I agree. I think it's something where when the fib is to protect the therapist, whether it's their inadequacy, hiding their inadequacies, pretending that they're not sleepy or, those types of things, I think there is some room for it. And I think we're all human and we're going to want to protect ourselves. But there's also this other element of it where it feels very self-serving. And I feel like those are the things that you're more likely to get caught at, whether it's asking for more details or even just the client feeling the inauthenticity in the relationship. Therapy Notes not only combines billing, scheduling, notes, and more into one easy-to-use platform, they now also offer secure client and practice messaging. It's never been easier to run your practice. Plane, train, you name it, access is just a click away. Another example of a fib is feigning compassion and empathy when no such sentiment is felt or pretending to show interest in a client's story. I think that's for the protection of the client. And the part that's for the protection of the client is helpful or it's part of our job. There's another section in this article that's about professionalism being a type of deception or a lie in that we put on our professional armor and that's not really us. And we can talk about that more if we have time. But I think it's this piece of if I am rude to the client to say like, you're super boring. And I guess it depends on the client. Or if I'm having a day that is challenging and I'm not feeling compassion, but I know that my job is to be compassionate, I don't necessarily see the harm in that, but you still may be caught. So what do you think?
I think a lot of this comes down to the environment that you work in, the relationships that you have with clients. And you and I have had years of publicly talking about being very authentic to how we work. And
Sure.
I think that that's probably going to come up in some of the discussion that we have throughout this episode here. And I'll be the first to say that not every therapeutic style, not every therapeutic placement, agency, wherever you work is going to necessarily support what we're talking about here. And so I want to frame this very much as these are possibilities. These aren't necessarily blanket rules. And so you can put down your pitchforks that you have not yet picked up to maybe go on a journey through some of these stories. But sometimes clients need to be told they're boring.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're going to lead sessions with how are you going to bore me today, but
although I could hear you say that to some clients.
probably. And that's going to come very much to the therapeutic relationships that I have with some clients. But for people who are working on social skills, who are working on, I want to better be able to storytell, to be able to keep people engaged in conversations with me. It can be very much a part of the therapeutic treatment plan to be able to say, hey, as we're talking about things, I'm noticing my attention drifting off and getting bored because you're really honing in on parts of the story that are not important. And so in a practical skill building sort of way, that's very much a part of a treatment plan. But that's done with the cooperation of the client to be able to get to the space of getting that kind of feedback.
Sure. And if it's not part of the treatment plan for clients who have different styles of speaking, who are interested in things that are different than you, I feel like there is a certain fib that may be in the client's best interest if they're not wanting to work on storytelling, or if what they're talking about isn't interesting to you, I don't think we say, "You're uninteresting to me. I'm having trouble staying awake." Like, that doesn't feel therapeutically helpful for a client that's not what they're working on. And I'm just saying the reverse of what you just said. So
Right.
I'm speaking the same thing, but I think it's important to acknowledge that so much of this, like all of therapy, it depends. If it's something the client is working on, if it's something that is relevant, that may impact their other relationships, whether they want to work on that or not, I think it's a clinical decision that depends so much on the client's ego strength, on the client's ability to take really direct feedback, and like you said, what you're collaborating on. There's a lot of other examples with fibs, but I think it makes sense to kind of keep moving down the list here. The next one is one that I feel like is really probably the one that therapists do the most. It's lies of omission. So there's not a cute name. It's just omission. And this one it can take the form of bluff, concealment, omission that hides or fails to disclose information that might have special significance to the client in the context of the therapeutic process. This is how it's defined in this article. And it's distinct from simply not telling the full truth, since the information is withheld specifically for the purpose of misleading or giving a false impression. One of the examples that I think is really important, and we have a whole podcast episode about this, and I'll link to tons of other articles that relate to this in the show notes. Pretending to know what to do when in reality, you don't know, and then engendering a sense of false hope.
I have done this in the past. And a lot of it did come from places of my own insecurity. And I think that one of the things that has really happened through our process in this podcast is becoming a lot more confident in myself and in my clinical abilities and learning a lot of things. It's hard putting out content week after week as far as like your stuff that comes up. And so I've learned a lot through this. But most importantly, what I've learned is recognizing the limits of what I can provide in a particular moment. And so I'm thinking, and I'm rambling until I get to the thinking point that I'm trying to come up to here.
I must be rubbing off.
But I'm thinking to the point where I got to the point where I could comfortably sit with clients and say, I don't have an answer for that right now. And here's my process for what I'm going to do to look into how we can address this. Sometimes that ends up being more training. Sometimes that ends up being consultations. But earlier in my career, it was very tempting just to double down on what I already knew and to kind of force clients into whatever treatment modality that it was. Part of what's emerged through all of this process for me is becoming really clear about how I work from the beginning of treatment. And so a lot of my intake sessions, or in the first couple of sessions, I'm talking with clients about, I don't know everything. There might be things that we run into. And part of how I work is I try to be pretty darn straightforward about what I'm experiencing. Does that mean I'm going to tell you everything? Absolutely not. But that did come from kind of a place early in my career where it was, I don't know what to do. People are coming to me for expertise, for help in their life. They might be paying me a lot of money in order to do that. And so all of that builds up to this insecurity where it's very tempting to be, I do have answers and I'm proving my worth, but I really want to be able to say, like, it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to not have answers for your clients all of the time. That can sometimes be the permission that your clients need to be, not everything has an answer right in a particular moment.
Yeah. One other piece of that, I think, is how you talk about it. Because I've had clients who had, significant others who received a message like that. Like, I don't have the answers for this. I don't know how to treat you, or those types of things. And if it's too direct, if it's too quote unquote honest, there are some clients that get the message, I'm too much, or what I have is untreatable. And so I think in adding to what you're saying, I think there are times when you can say, this is a specialty that I've not dug into a lot. I have some colleagues I can refer you to on this, or what I'm planning to do is to consult with those colleagues so that I can bring some of that back in. That is honest and is a plan. Whereas, like, I don't know how to work with that. This is outside of my scope. I'm gonna need to refer you out, which I think that clients may report back an experience that is not what was actually said because they felt abandoned by the therapist. So I'm going to acknowledge that sometimes you do a great job of saying all those things and the client still feels like I'm too much and they kicked me out. But I think that there's that element of being able to speak to the honesty while still staying in a compassionate space and in a collaborative space. And I think maybe that's not what the question has been, but it seems like sometimes, and this is stated in the article, and I've experienced this myself, when you go to a place of, I don't know, or you go to a place of overstating a little bit your capacity to get to a place that you can help them, and your clients find out, they can see it as very harmful. You lied. You don't know about this. Or you lied. You told me that you couldn't work with this and you kicked me out, right? Like, and it can feel very, very harmful if we don't handle it correctly. Understanding how we talk about things, whether they're, the next one, which is deflections, or if they're full omissions, I think we need to make sure that we're thinking about it and doing it consciously and not from a defensive space of, I have to prove my worth. I have to be everything to my clients. I need to hold hope for my clients, even though it's going to require a whole bunch of homework and I'm not going to tell them about it. Like, there can be all kinds of reasons why we think we need to lie to our clients in that moment. And I think that there's compassionate ways to talk about our own limitations while still holding hope and still providing the grounding for the client.
You learned a lot in grad school, but your years of schooling did not prepare you for owning a business, much less a profitable practice that pays you well, and it's time to bridge the gap. I want to tell you about a brand new course from Green Oak Accounting called Money for Therapists Practice Startup. This course will teach you what you need to know to get your practice's financial footing in order from the outset. This course is a must-have for private practice owners who want their therapy businesses to be profitable and financially sustainable. Green Oak Accounting is the industry leader in accounting for mental health, and they use the lessons learned from working with hundreds of practices to develop this course. They want you to avoid months or years of financial mistakes by providing you with the exact information you need to get the back end of your business set up right.
No more wondering about the missing piece. If you're ready to make wise decisions about your money and give your private practice the strong financial foundation it needs to thrive in the long term, this course is for you. Don't simply wish you had been taught how to run a business. Take action now to ensure your private practice's financial success. Visit greenoakaccounting.com/startup to learn more and to take advantage of a limited time deal on the course. So deflection is another type of misleading prevarication, a form of reality distortion that tends to bend the truth rather than contradicting it. And so it can be deliberate use of vague, figurative, or metaphorical language in order to emphasize false or partial truths for the purpose of deflecting attention from the facts of the matter. And an example of this is just passing time in counseling rather than the honest hard work of therapeutic intervention so as to escape a role for which the counselor feels inadequate. It can also be deflecting blame or distorting truth by being intentionally vague or using metaphorical language, figurative speech, or words with softening connotations. It's evading what's happening in the room.
So when you first bring this up, I'm thinking how many therapists are taught when a client asks you a direct question about things. Hey, are you married? Or hey, where do you live? What neighborhood are you in? We get taught into kind of these deflection kinds of things, which are, oh, why are you interested in that?
That's interesting that you talked about. Why are you asking about this? So another one is exaggerating your emotional response for therapeutic purposes. So some of it is avoiding, right? It's saying, hey, That's an interesting question. What brought that up? Some of it can be just chit-chatting and avoiding the hard question, right? And some of it can be actually having an emotional response and be like, or overstating it and potentially even understating your response so that you're focusing your attention on the client, but you're trying to manipulate how you present for therapeutic effect, pretending to be happy to see them or having a big response or those types of things. And I can see that as being potentially helpful. And I could also see it being one of those things that backfire where you've had this big response and then the next week they ask you about it and you don't remember.
I'm thinking about working with little kids when you're dealing with other things going on in your life where you do have to exaggerate kind of
Sure.
that excitement, where it might be necessary sometimes in order to do what's needed for the client. I mean, if you're going through something like your own grief process and you have, a 4-year-old who's bounding into the office kind of thing, I don't think you're going to be completely honest and say something, "Oh, I'm just really sad today. Too bad, kid." Like,
I agree. And I also think that it may be something that you don't want to bring in to your adult clients, depending on what their clinical material is for the day. I think there are times when we might say, I'm a little bit tired, I'm a little off, this is what's going on. And I think there are times when it would be more likely that we don't present that and we do our best to potentially mask or manipulate our body language and words to try to be as present as possible for the client, even if we're pulling from a place that's not authentic, because our job is to do so. And I think this speaks to that professionalism as inauthenticity and deception as well. We are supposed to show up a certain way. And if we cannot, we have to decide, do we fake it or do we call out? And I think there are times when faking it is required.
you also don't want clients coming in and telling them straight up, "Oh, it's you."
I think that would be pretty bad. Social niceties are one of those things that we may lie about in all of our relationships, including the therapeutic relationship. So the last one is actually one that we had a little bit of a debate ahead of time. So I want to make sure we get to this. Denial is the conscious rejection of reality or believing that something false is true. And the one that we talked about ahead of time that I want to make sure we get to is not acknowledging sexual or other transference and countertransference, an attempt to reject such feelings. And the way we framed it, and I think that where we can go with the conversation is, if a client says, "Do you find me attractive?" How do you respond?
Huge caveats before I start talking.
So what are these caveats?
It depends on the nature of how it's brought up. It depends on the relationship with the client and the agreed upon way that you work with the client.
Yeah.
Because sometimes this can be incredibly rich discussions that are part of what the client's treatment plan is. If this is somebody who's working on being better presenting for dating and saying, "I have a really hard time getting matches with people. I'm concerned that people are not finding me unattractive, or I'm concerned that people are finding me unattractive. I need some honest feedback. Do you think that I'm attractive?" I would probably answer that pretty straightforward. Client,
But what would you say?
depends on the clients. Like, if they're a hottie, I would be like, "Yeah, you have some conventional attractive features to you. Maybe there's something else about your dating profile that goes along with things." If it's something where people are less conventionally attractive, I might give them the direct feedback that says, not everybody's going to find you physically attractive. You might need to lean into things more that feature your personality or feature your hobbies or your interests out of things that bring about an enthusiasm. And I've had, for me in my practice, I've especially had like teenage boys kind of struggling with some of their self-identity out of trying to find their place in the world and wanting honest feedback to know kind of where to orient themselves from. And so it might come around things like, hey, the way that you dress doesn't help the way that you're presenting yourself. And that might be something specific that could help you appear to be more attractive. Now, if I get the sense that clients are asking this because there's a transference, countertransference aspect into this, where it's more, hey, are you feeling what I'm feeling here? And like, is there something between us? I'm not going to answer that as directly.
Yeah.
And that's going to get more into what the relationship with the client is. It's going to get more into what the client's ultimately feeling, why they might be feeling that way, that would fall into more of looking at their underlying processes. But I don't have a blanket, I'm never going to comment on a client's appearances sort of thing, especially when they're eliciting direct feedback.
We have different caseloads. We're also different people. And I think this is the biggest difference. And I think how we respond. I don't know that I would, by and large, answer that question. I think it would depend on the relationship, all of the things that you talked about. But in that question is very fraught, I think, for women. I think if I have men who are asking me this question, it may not be safe for me to answer it, honestly, because of the potential for the, are you feeling what I'm feeling kind of thing. And so the way that I address it is trying to seek what is underneath it. If it's truly just a question about their physical attractiveness, I think I go to my own perception of attractiveness. And I talk through kind of philosophically what makes someone attractive and how I might find them attractive or unattractive and what those things are. I wouldn't say I find you attractive or I don't find you attractive. I don't think that I want to be that direct ever. I think it's something where I'd want to talk to the core issue around what they're seeking. And if it's how to present themselves best, I don't know that I know the answer to that. And so I would talk through, how do you decide, what clothing choices you're making? How do you decide how you want to present yourself? Those types of things. I don't know that I would say, well, you might want to change what clothes you're wearing. Like, I don't think I would go there. And I think oftentimes with women, when someone asks me about their appearance or whether or not I think that they are looking better or worse than they were before, I am very hesitant to comment on women's bodies because so much of society does, and it feels like oppression. And so to me, I want to go down to how they are feeling about their body, their relationship with their body, their relationship with their appearance, and going into the clinical issues that I think are more present than answering, do you think I'm attractive, or whatever the question is. And so to get there, I think I have to deflect to a certain extent around not directly answering the question, or maybe going to, that's something that doesn't fit into our relationship, and trying to talk about the therapeutic relationship and how it can be affected by those types of evaluations. But I think it's always, it depends.
And I want to be clear that this is kind of very specific cases where this is being brought up because it's either part of the client's treatment plan that is agreed upon by the client. Hey, we're going to be working on this. It's clients where the relationship does have the understanding and the clinical understanding on our part where this is not going to greatly impact what the relationship is. I'm not greeting clients every day with, hey, I'll go, how you doing today? Like, if that's not something that's being asked for. And so it does take a tremendous amount of trust to be able to give completely honest feedback to clients who are asking for completely honest feedback.
Yeah.
And I think part of how I work is very much kind of curtains pulled back. Here's where I'm coming from in this, whether it be situations like this, where here's the thought process that goes in this. If I get the sense that clients are asking some of these questions and it's not coming from a place where they want that completely honest feedback, I think there's a tremendous amount of our field that tells us to go exactly where you're going and
Sure.
what you just described.
And I guess it was denials, not deflection. So to clarify for those who are playing along at home, to get to kind of the takeaways that we're wanting to get to here, I think the biggest thing is context is key.
Yes.
Who is the client in front of you? What's going on? The biggest piece is there therapeutic benefit to the client or not? Because if it's just to protect yourself, you're human, you might do it anyway, but that's not necessarily a deception that we're co-signing, for example. And it speaks to the relationship. Some of my clients, I think, even if they ask me direct questions, are wanting me to connect with them in a compassionate way. And some people are asking for direct truth. And so I need to understand what's in the relationship and when is there social niceties, when are there the what quote unquote white lies that we tell all the time versus when is the lie harmful and pushing the treatment back because there's not a full discussion of what's actually there, or it's harming the relationship because you're withholding important things. That's what I'm taking away. What are you taking away, Curt?
So much of this is contextual. So much of this is being able to think ahead. How could this potentially go wrong? Because ultimately, what we're working on is the therapeutic relationship with the client. And especially when you do decide to not be fully truthful. I mean, even as much as, I rebranded my practice a couple of years ago to Real Honest Therapy. Like that does not mean that we are 100% telling the 100% truth all of the time. But what we tend to do is work in a lot more straightforward way.
Yeah.
And so it does give us the clinical judgment to not be completely transparent when it's needed. And a lot of thought process goes into a field, a job that is very much about needing to react in the moment to things that are unplanned.
Yeah.
And recognizing when I say something that's not the complete truth, why am I doing this? And how is it going to be something that we respond to? Are there times that I've been guilty of most of the things? I don't think I've really done like Whoppers.
I don't think I've done Whoppers either.
But most of the other stuff I think has come up at one point or another in my career, sometimes with success, sometimes it's backfired horribly. And then it goes into that relationship repair. And so not all the times has it been something that's been helpful. My takeaway is really be really comfortable with yourself in going through the process of how honest you are with clients, how directly that you're going to respond to direct questions. And I think even in a lot of the times where, I'm giving some of these examples here, it is en route to getting to some of those deeper questions that you're talking about that many clinicians who are listening to this would say, oh yeah, I would totally just go into the process part of why is the question coming up or how does it fit. Sometimes I find a benefit out of answering more directly. Sometimes people have that trust. Sometimes as a therapeutic client myself, I would rather just have my own therapist just be more direct and honest about some things. So a lot of this is going to come down to your client preference too.
For folks and Aaron who asked for what can you do instead or what can you do when it backfires, I think we've talked about what can you do instead. When it backfires, I think we covered that pretty well in should therapists admit mistakes. So I'll link to that one in the show notes. You can, if you have had some of this backfire or you've had other types of mistakes or ruptures within the relationship, we definitely have some content to go through there. So we don't need to cover it here.
You can find our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media. Join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue this conversation. And until next time, I'm Curt Woodhelm with Katie Vernoy.
Shout out to our partner, Therapy Notes, the #1 trusted EHR among mental health professionals. Don't forget to use promo code MODERN and try them out for 2 months free.
Ready to make your practice profitable? Green Oak Accounting's Money for Therapists practice startup course has what you need. Visit greenoakaccounting.com/startup and set your practice up for financial success. Don't wait. Enroll today.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.